in general, what we want to identify is that there are three different kinds of unemployment. So the unemployment rate is calculated by finding how many people are unemployed and dividing it by the number of people who are employed plus the number of people who are unemployed. And you get a rate. What's a normal unemployment rate? What's the unemployment rate usually? What would seem like a healthy unemployment rate to you? Yes?
6%.
6%? Okay. What do you think?
They say around 3%.
6, 3, 2, 5? In that neighborhood? Right? There is an idea called the natural rate of unemployment. That some unemployment in the economy is healthy. Would we ever want the unemployment rate to get to 0?
No,
Why not?
because then you can't allocate people towards other resources if you have new businesses crop up. So if you have companies start that need to hire people and nobody to hire, you won't have new businesses start.
Okay, that's from a growth point of view, right? If everybody already has a job and you want to start something new, there's nobody to hire. So that's a problem. What about from you personally? If you're not allowed to be unemployed, that means that you have to take whatever job is given to you. How many of you read The Giver in middle school or high school, right? The Giver, everybody is appointed their job. How would you like to live in a world like that, where you're told what your job is going to be? What do we call it when somebody else is in charge of what job you have? Let's not get into it. Okay? We don't want that kind of a world. We want to allow for a world where there is some churn, where there's some turnover, where we're allowed to choose to some extent. I like to analogize the unemployment situation to the dating market. To dating, okay? So first we have frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is like speed dating. What's speed dating? It's where you go to a place and there's a long table set up and everybody is randomly assigned a seat at the table, and every 5 minutes everybody moves. Right? Everybody shifts along the table. And you have 5 minutes to talk to each, or even less, 5 minutes, to talk to the person across the table for you to see if it's a good match. And the idea is that by the end of the night, everybody has found somebody who is a good match. Okay. So then frictional unemployment is a situation where there's somebody out there who has the right set of skills for a job that requires that same set of skills. It's just a matter of them finding each other. It's a matter of them meeting each other. Now, it doesn't have to be, Mr. or Mrs. Right. It could just be Mr. or Mrs. Right now, right? But it doesn't have to be something permanent, but it could be something that there's at least a good match for the time being. Most of you will graduate university and go out and get a job, and you plan to be in that job probably for 3 to 4 years, during which time you're hoping to develop new skills that make you more competitive for a better job. Similarly, most of you aren't planning to get married next week, right? But you wouldn't mind dating somebody sometime soon. And so you're in a situation where you want to have a short-term relationship that maybe could lead to a long-term relationship. In other words, you like the frictional element of it because it means that in 3 or 4 years, or in 2 or 3 months, you can switch and try something different. So there's somebody that is a good pair, a good job, a good match. It's just a hard time finding that person. What kinds of things could reduce frictional unemployment? What kinds of things can make it easier for people to find jobs that are a good match for them? Yeah?
The internet?
Sure, the internet. Indeed, Monster. All of these kinds of situations have made it much easier for people to find a job that is appropriate for them and a worker that is good for the job. So we've seen actually in the long run a decrease in frictional unemployment because that matching part is easier to do. The second kind of unemployment is structural. Structural unemployment would be like if you're out there all the time trying to meet somebody, and there just isn't anybody that's right for you, or at least they don't think you're right for them. It could be either way, right? It could be either, nobody's interested in you, or you're not meeting anybody that you're interested in. Either way, everybody goes home alone. In the job market, that means that there are people out there that have skills that are looking for a job, but it also means that there's no job that matches that set of skills. It doesn't mean you don't have skills, it just means you don't have the right set of skills. Or it could be that you're an employer and the set of skills that you want, nobody has. So, who has to change? Right? If I, for some horrible reason, had to re-enter the dating market, I'd have to change. Right? I'd have to do some changes in order to become attractive to the dating market again. Thank God that's not probable, right? But it could be the case that, if I'm out there looking for a job, I have to develop some new skills so that I can get hired. Or it could be that an employer decides there are a lot of people with this set of skills, but they can't find jobs. Can I think of something that I could produce that would require employees that do have that set of skills? Could I find a way to employ those people who have skills, but nobody else seems to want? It's like discovering an underpriced asset. So you all are in business school, and some of you are studying entrepreneurship. Oftentimes we're encouraged when we're studying entrepreneurship to look for the next biggest new thing, to look forward and to think about the future, about great new technologies and such. What we could also be encouraged to do is to look for underpriced assets or underpriced resources, including employees. And there are a lot of employees potentially out there that could be employed if we could find work for them to do. So how can we be actively thinking about how to create new enterprises that employ those who otherwise would be structurally unemployed? If you remain structurally unemployed for a long time, you can become discouraged. A discouraged worker is somebody who's been trying to find a job for a while and it doesn't seem like they're having any luck. Right? It's just like somebody who gives up dating. It just goes live in their mom's basement playing Fortnite all the time. A discouraged worker leaves the labor force and as a result is no longer counted as being unemployed. When workers become discouraged, it actually looks like the unemployment rate goes down, but the number of people who have jobs doesn't go up. It's just that there's fewer people being counted as unemployed. When somebody gets discouraged, what do? They go home. They sit around. They're not happy, though. What do people who are not happy but are at home more than they usually are do? Well, we see an increase in domestic violence. We see an increase in substance abuse. Okay. That includes alcoholism, but it also has contributed to the use of obituates, like OxyContin. So after the last recession, there were a lot of people who were discouraged workers because they were structurally unemployed. They'd been involved maybe in manufacturing or some other kind of job that after the recession, those jobs just disappeared. Those people became discouraged. They couldn't find new work. They had not been continually updating their skill set so that they would be able to get a job in the future. They hadn't been reading a book a week. They hadn't taught themselves how to program. They hadn't taught themselves any other skills. So they were discouraged. A lot of them had been hurt on the job at some point in time in the past. They had a bad knee or had hurt their shoulder. And so they go to the doctor now. They don't have a job, and they ask the doctor to put them on disability. Well, during the last recession, we saw a lot of people applying for disability all of a sudden. Why? Because then you get additional benefits through disability. So they use that as a way to get some money, And to be honest, most of them had been disabled, but now they were also discouraged. So to me, it's really important to think about how can we help these folks to find the dignity of work again, the pride of work, in a way that we can employ them towards making something that's valuable and useful for society. And that is one way to combat the disability crisis and the use of opiates crisis. Am I making sense? And I leave that to you as something to think about doing. Okay. The third kind of unemployment is cyclical. Now, cyclical unemployment has to do with this. Right? This is quality of life. This is time. Right? And we expect the economy to be growing over time, but there are time periods when we are in a recession. Why? Well, we're going to get to the why of recessions later, but we know that it happens. And when we are in a recession, even people who have good skills find it hard to find a job just because total productivity is decreasing. Total level of production has decreased. Right? A lot of companies close up shop and aren't doing business. So a lot of people who, man, I thought I had developed all the best skills in the world, find themselves without a job. Now, in cyclical unemployment, it is primarily people who don't have high-level skills that become unemployed first. So then, people who have a college degree experience unemployment at a rate much lower than people who do not have a college degree. If you're thinking about quitting school, consider sticking it out just so that in the long run, if there is another business cycle downturn, like we're in now, you're more likely to keep your job. I'm able to keep on doing my job. Why? Because I can do it online. And a lot of people who work with their minds are able to work online even though there is a pandemic on. It was mostly people in hospitality, in restaurants, right, and in travel that lost their jobs at the beginning of this pandemic. We're going to look at how many people lost their jobs at the beginning of the pandemic in a couple minutes here. But consider sticking it out so that you have that sort of insurance against recessions. Let me check my notes and make sure I've covered everything I wanted to here today. Other things that could cause unemployment to go up include new regulations that make it harder to get a job. A higher minimum wage can make it more likely for there to be an increase in unemployment. In Washington, D.C., they recently passed a law that says in order to be a child care worker, you have to have an associate's degree. Do you usually need an associate's degree to work at kinder care? It depends. Would we like for our children to have highly qualified caretakers? Of course. Do they necessarily have to get those skills at college? How many of you felt like this class has really equipped you to be able to take care of little children very well? Aside from learning a few dad jokes, probably not a lot, right? Okay, so there's a problem there. What about regulations that require people to get a cosmetology license in order to braid hair? Do you need to have a cosmetology license in order to braid hair? Is that something that we should require of people? Those kinds of regulations and licensing requirements actually make it more difficult for people to enter into that industry and to compete with people who are already in that industry. The people who are already in that industry want the regulation to be put in place so that there is less competition. So most of those kinds of regulations exist to protect incumbents to those industries. What about growth in the world? So oftentimes people are concerned that globalization means that American workers then have to compete with workers in other countries. And that's true. We do have to compete with workers in other countries. And if we're producing something that doesn't require a lot of skill to produce, that competition is going to be more severe, at least in the time being, until those countries also increase their skill levels. But at the same time, as we're having to compete more for jobs, making things, the market for purchasing things that we make is expanded. Those other countries also buy stuff from us. So there's a balance between the two, and what in the long run it can lead to is each individual having a greater opportunity to do whatever task it is that they have a comparative advantage in, which then leads to a higher level of overall wealth in the world, so that everybody is made better off. So when it comes to competition across international lines, I don't feel threatened immediately. I know that many people who don't have a lot of skills would, in the short run, feel threatened, but that just means that they gotta try harder. That's the way it's true about all kinds of competition. I don't see any reason why Americans per se would be less competitive at doing anything than people from a different country. It's not an issue for me.